Hi everyone, this is Danielle, and I am excited to offer a little presentation. I'm calling this Why We Study Literature, the Importance of Soft Skills in the Workforce, and Tips for Success in Humanities 142. So this presentation is meant to help give some insight on why universities teach literature and the humanities, which is what literature is a part of, and the important skills that literature teaches that directly connect literature to the workforce by helping people theoretically become qualified candidates in the area of what are referred to as soft skills or transferable skills. So some people would say I'm an English teacher. So what I actually am is a professional literary analyst and a digital humanist. And literature is a discipline within what's called the humanities or humanistic study. And that is the study of what makes humans human. So what constitutes the human condition? What are human beliefs and why? What informs different human perspectives and how, and so on and so forth. So while I teach literature and writing, what I'm more interested in is teaching skills to my students through the medium or the vehicles of writing and literature. And the humanistic work I do in literature uses statistical programming languages. I use R and Python, and this is the digital humanities part of my work. And I examine large corpora of literary and medical texts to understand how the theatrical popularity of revenge in the 16th and 17th centuries embodied widespread cultural anxieties toward theological and political unrest. Right, but this presentation isn't about me. And I wanted to present on this topic, or on these topics, I should say, not only because of my really intense beliefs in the power of humanistic work, but also because I wanted to share what the humanities and literature offer to all of you and all disciplines. So this presentation is meant to serve as a bridge, like Dr. Singh's bridge metaphor in the image that I have here. The humanities too are not readily considered outside of their economic, university, and workforce values. So while I will be discussing the economic value of the humanities, I hope this presentation offers additional insights into not only the design of a metaphorical bridge, but the human implications of crossing such a bridge as both individuals and members of these shared communities. So this presentation will begin by briefly addressing what the humanities are. I will then discuss the economic value of the humanities and job readiness. I'm going to move on then to 4 reasons why the future depends on the humanities. I'm going to go over 5 tips for succeeding in Humanities 142. And I'm going to briefly address the student learning outcomes for this particular course. So just to kind of talk a little bit more about what the humanities are, because a lot of people just don't know unless you're working explicitly within that study. The fundamental purpose of the humanities is to understand what it means to be human. And a variety of methodologies are used across humanities disciplines to ask and consider who we are and what things mean. So the humanities seek to understand and inform identities and community values, and they ask us to situate ourselves in global and historical contexts to understand what we call humanhood, It might sound like a weird word, but it is something that it's a word that we use. And that last bullet point I have there is from Leon Wieseltier, who's a prominent cultural critic and philosopher and law historian. Posits that the most important question that we can ask today is not how does it work, but what does it mean? And this statement really encompasses the driving objective behind humanistic work. And that's really important for when we analyze literature. It's not just how, what point of view is being used in this text, but why is it being used in this text? And to what end? What does it mean? Right? Those are the types of questions that we're asking. We want to be asking. So I'm not going to read through this list of quote unquote traditional humanities disciplines, but these are some of the traditional humanities disciplines as defined by the 1965 National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities Act. And some of them are obvious, right? So we have language, linguistics, literature, writing, and there's a bunch of different things in writing, history, and so on and so forth. And like I said, while some of them might seem obvious, that very last bullet point there, which says those aspects of social sciences which have humanistic content and employ humanistic methods. That last item reminds us that some non-humanities social sciences do maintain humanistic methods and queries. And those are things like sociology, psychology, psychiatry, actuarial science. Sometimes math falls into there. There are some engineering, very specific types of engineering that falls into that. So there are some non-humanities disciplines that do use humanistic methods and humanistic query as a means to go about their, making the arguments that they need to argue to communicate what they're attempting to communicate. So I talked about traditional humanities disciplines. There are always new disciplinary approaches in the humanities. So in the last 20 to 30 years, these new humanities disciplines have emerged. So digital humanities, something in which I talked about that I work, uses computational methods to explore humanistic questions. Medical humanities addresses ethics related to medical technology and the various interpersonal aspects of the medical field. Narrative medicine uses the power of narrative and storytelling for both patients and caregivers to negotiate and reconsider the healthcare domain, while graphic medicine encompasses visual storytelling through things like graphic novels and comics to give a voice to patients and medical providers. And the image I have here is from a graphic novel called Cancer Vixen, which tells the story of one woman's experience with breast cancer. Other new disciplines include things like the health humanities, which emphasizes allopathic or holistic medicine, which is different to our current prevailing healthcare system of what's called osteopathic medicine that has been in place since the 19th century. The environmental humanities is one of the newest disciplines, which focuses on the intersection of humanistic research and the environment. Disability studies, women's and gender studies, and masculinity studies are also relatively newer humanistic approaches. The image here is of Sue Austin, an artist who seeks to challenge perceptions of what it means to be disabled. And she recently presented at the Mayo Clinic Symposium on Transforming Perceptions in Healthcare Through the Humanities. So it should be clear by that cursory look at relevant disciplines, the traditional and the newer, emerging humanities disciplines, that humanistic research and practices explore ethics, empathy, identity, and the human condition. And humanistic study forces us to ask, why do we value what we value? And this question, which comes from Dr. Suzanne Akbari, can be extended to consider the implications of what it is we value. Sorry, I was just reading my note there, right? She's a medieval literarian, which means she studies medieval literature. Sorry, that's just what I wanted to add there. So Dr. Akbari rightly bifurcates or splits into the humanities into economic and abstract values, which I have put into 2 bullet points here. And looking to her bifurcation, I'm going to focus mostly on the economic value here, as it relates to job readiness and the transferable skill sets of humanities courses like Humanities 142 and what they're meant to teach. But I don't want to dismiss that there is an equal abstract value to the humanities. So to discuss the economic value of the humanities, and when I talk about economic value, I'm talking about when the ROI on something, right? The return on investment. When we invest in doing something, what is it giving back to us? When we're taking college courses, whoever is paying for that, what are they ultimately getting back from that? And what is the society getting back from that, right? Whether it's in the form of citizenship, being a productive citizen, which is important, and also how much you end up getting paid, and also what you are providing for companies, which also takes the form of being a good citizen. So to discuss the economic value of the humanities, I focus on what the humanities are best known for, soft skills, or what I will suggest we refer to them as later in the presentation, power skills. So to discuss job readiness, I looked at Google's projects Oxygen and Aristotle. The former, or Project Oxygen, was a data-driven research project that aimed to understand attributes of high-performing managers. And the latter, or Project Aristotle, sought to understand what makes the perfect team. This type of information is critical to a discussion on the humanities, not only to consider the importance of soft skills at work in the private sector or the corporate world, but also to underscore the sometimes forgotten but foundational purpose of soft skills, which is what literature courses teach, but also to produce good citizens. Note that the larger social system considers productive employees as productive citizens, contributing to the social system of which they are a participating member. And this goes back to the origins of the university, way back to the classical Greek university system. So Project Oxygen initiated from the technocratic culture of Google, where its STEM-based workforce balked against the idea that they needed such bureaucratic people like managers. They said, we don't need managers, right? What is this hierarchical system that we have? So Google's founders undertook this 2008 research project that they called Project Oxygen, with the hypothesis that a holacracy, or a holacracy is a flat organization, makes for a better workforce. But their research actually proved the opposite. So Project Oxygen came after Google became a holacracy in 2002 as a response to engineers' disapproval of management. But Project Oxygen was also the way that Google overwhelmingly convinced their workforce that managers were needed. As a holacracy or a flat organization, employees struggled to find answers to everyday questions or get help with projects. They had no idea what to prioritize. They lost sight of the company's strategic mission and how their work fit in with the larger picture. They were mired in constant conflicts. Worse yet, they felt stagnant, unmotivated, and underappreciated. The 2008 results of Project Oxygen resulted in 8 attributes of high-performing managers. While the first 7 emphasize soft skills that humanities courses seek to foster, like Humanities 142, such as mentorship, empowerment, expressing interest in employee success, and having effective communication and listening skills, the need for technical expertise or knowledge came in last. And as you can see here on the right, the list 1 through 8 are those 8 attributes of high-performing managers. You can see that having that technical skills or knowledge, that's the last skill. 1 through 7 are all soft skills. So Google redid Project Oxygen 10 years later in 2018, and they slightly updated their findings to a list of 10 attributes. Number 6 was modified to emphasize the desire for feedback from supervisors on performance, and numbers 9 and 10 were added to highlight the attributes of collaboration and decision-making. What Project Oxygen can tell us is that universities' curricula, not just humanities courses, offer a space to cultivate such skills so that our students, you guys, should be able to go on to become effective managers and leaders in various industries. So we talked about Project Oxygen, but what about Project Aristotle? So after the success of Project Oxygen, Google initiated Project Aristotle to understand, well, what makes the perfect team? So this was a 2-year data-driven study that looked at 37,000 employees and found that their best performing teams were interdisciplinary. Teams that were solely or mostly comprised of scientists were found to underperform. Project Aristotle yielded 5 attributes of what makes the perfect team, with the most important attribute being psychological or emotional safety. Psychological safety suggests that to collaboratively succeed, team members must feel confident in taking risks, making mistakes, and being heard. This project also showed that the best teams exhibited a range of soft skills such as empathy, generosity, equality, curiosity toward teammates' idea, and emotional intelligence. So like Project Oxygen, Project Aristotle emphasizes human qualities that people desire in the workforce. The need for technical expertise can be extrapolated as presumed skill sets of employees. And in order to cultivate high-performing managers, leaders, and teams, human qualities that seem so basic are actually the hottest tickets in town. So many companies, besides Google, have expressed frustration and concern toward a lack of qualified, well-rounded pool of applicants. The founder and CEO of Slack and the president of Direction are just 2 additional examples of company leaders that have expressed how humanistic qualities are needed in the workforce and lacking in job candidates. And I have 2 quotations here from each of them. I'm not going to read them, but you're always welcome to pause and read them if you would like. Excuse me. So now I'm going to get to some more data. This is from Sherm. Sherm is a society for human resource management. They are a leader, a highly credible leader in detailing what is it the workforce needs in terms of job candidates. So Sherm additionally demonstrates, like Google and Slack and Direction and all these other companies, so Sherm also demonstrates current research that stresses how employers are finding it increasingly difficult to find potential employees that maintain such soft skills as delineated in Google's research. So in 2018, Sherm studied more than 650 employers and discovered that 73% of them, that is an inordinately high amount, found it very difficult to find qualified applicants, particularly in the areas of critical thinking, communication, listening, and interpersonal skills. Those are all soft skills that are meant to be taught in humanities courses and a course like Humanities 142. Sherm's study also emphasized that with the rise of automation, job candidates possessing soft skills are in even more demand, and easily automated skills are in less demand. So this infographic shows the answers to the survey's questions to employers about what skills are important to gaining leadership positions at their organizations. It can be clearly seen that the left column, or human skills that are in demand, have higher percentages and are more needed in job applicants versus the lower demand skills or easily automated skills listed in the right column. So this particular Sherm study shows the most recent soft skills U.S. employers have trouble finding in candidates. As a reminder, these soft skills are behaviors, personality traits, and work habits, such as collaboration, critical thinking, perseverance, and communication. Note that this list does not include knowledge. Knowledge is different from what are called like soft skills or transferable skills. Soft skills are transferable skills because they are innate skills that can be transferred to most any context, which makes them more valuable than knowledge. So knowledge is something that can be used like in a very specific setting. So I teach literature and writing. If you asked me to go fix an airplane, I don't have that knowledge. So my knowledge is worthless in that situation. It has no value whatsoever. Now, if you asked me to say, here is an aviation safety mechanic manual, we would like you to read through it and talk to us about what you think is working and not working. I could put a team together and talk about how we could improve it, right? That is an area where I would be able to not use my knowledge because I have no idea what anything about aviation safety is, but that wouldn't matter, right? I would be able to understand context clues and use my skill sets and be able to have a productive conversation about that by using my transferable skill sets and still be able to do that work very productively. So in here you can see that the 3 soft skills U.S. employers have the most trouble finding, right, are critical thinking, communication, and creativity. And that the most wanted soft skills, dependability, teamwork, collaboration, problem solving, and flexibility. Knowledge, again, is not anywhere here to be found. Again, because that's usually a given when you're employed. When you get a job, it's presumed that you have the basic knowledge of what the job entails. So taking a cue from the president of Dartmouth College, it makes more sense to refer to soft skills as power skills because these are skills that are not naturally or necessarily acquired on the job. They are hard-won skills that accrue and develop over the passage of time and within specific contexts, like taking humanities courses. Research suggests that a cultural misconception about degrees might be to blame for the dearth of qualified, well-rounded applicants. Students incline toward technical degrees and eschew anything non-technical because they believe such degrees will provide them financial security and occupational mobility. While we don't want to deter students from enrolling in technical degree programs, universities do want to ensure that programs offer what we call an efficacious integration of the technical and the human. So we want students to take a variety. Even if your discipline or your major is a technical field, it's important that it's not purely technical because you're going to miss out on what, for example, humanistic study teaches you. So that's like the main purpose of this presentation, is to emphasize that one of those, that is a major point of this presentation. So why does the future depend on the humanities? I have 4 reasons why. So the first is information literacy. So in 2018, social media sites surpassed newspapers as the #1 news source for Americans. The humanities focus on the training of deciphering information and its implications, and this will be needed more and more in the future and is necessary. In an effective democracy, citizens need to be able to understand and make educated decisions about information, whether they think it's true or false, and more importantly, to question the information's motivation, its delivery method, and its various objectives. And that all falls under what we call information literacy. Sometimes it's called media literacy, news media literacy. There's a variety of names for it, but it's incredibly important. The second reason highlights that the humanities and STEM are necessary partners. While scientific, medical, and technological advancements have ethical implications, in order for such work to reach the public, humanities tactics are and will be needed to help the public connect with and understand how complex research and arguments relate to their identities, and by their, I mean the public's. We call them the laymen. That means the non-scientists or the non-experts, right? As both individuals and community members, right? An example of this might be COVID research or vaccine information or climate change information. How do you take large, complex scientific information and communicate that to the layperson, people who are not subject matter experts in the field of virology, right? For example. So, or who are climatologists, for example, right? So that's a matter of how do we, that's what the humanities does as well. The third reason encompasses the ethical nature of medical, scientific, and technological studies. We have to keep you guys accountable. While such research and advancements are needed, their implications, motivations, and modes of dissemination need to be thoughtfully considered and sometimes challenged. Humanists can sometimes be painted as too difficult or too argumentative because we like to argue. This is true. This is why everything you're doing in this class is arguing. But that's because humanistic inquiry considers broader cultural questions that such studies might not explicitly address. Humanists overall are trained to argue and to argue very well. And this explains why the #1 pre-law major is English. So if there are scientific things happening, like scientific advancements or technological advancements that are happening that might be ethically concerning, humanists will start to ask those larger cultural questions. Like, what are the implications on human privacy, or what borders are these crossing? A very contentious but obvious example of this that I can pull out of my head right now is the abortion issues that are currently taking place in the country. I mean, they've always been taking place, but they're gaining traction again right now. This doesn't necessarily have to do with innovation, but it does have to do with new legal incentives. So humanists are going to come in and say, there's this new legislation, and we have to consider, and then you have scientists or medical practitioners who are going to come in with their research and then talk about why abortion should be banned because of these reasons, for these medical reasons. And then humanists are going to come in with their arguments as to why that shouldn't be or why it should be. So that's an example of how, or for example, the stem cell research gets talked about a lot in the humanities, and things like designer babies. I want to choose the eye color of my baby, and the hair color and the gender and that type of thing, right? So these are all medical and technological inventions that the humanities will question, right? Or question the implications of. Well, what will that, so larger cultural questions of these technological inventions. I'm not saying anything personal, giving any personal opinions about those. I'm just using those as examples of where humanists will they already have come in and said things, but where they continue to write argumentation about them. And the final reason here is that is for innovation and creativity, or why the humanities are needed for the future, which is not only pertinent to the scientific community, but also to the business and political communities as well. The basis of the humanities is grounded in asking new questions, reframing old questions, identifying problems, seeking creative solutions, and making arguments for innovation and change. So before I move on to tips for success in Humanities 142, I know this is a long presentation, but like I said, I had a lot to cover. I just want to emphasize again that I don't want to reduce the humanities to power skills and job readiness, although that is one of my major aspects as an instructor of literature and writing, is that I'm primarily interested in the like I say I'm a teacher, but it's like I can't teach unless the student is there. The student has to acquire the skills through practice. So it's always weird saying I'm a teacher, because it's like I don't teach. It's like I try to teach, but I can't force it into people. The student has to actually do stuff. So, but I'm most interested in, it's always yeah, literature is great, and I've spent my life studying it, but I'm more interested in asking questions about literature, and I'm more interested about the skills that literature teaches than I am about the literature. I study literature on my own separately as a researcher. When I'm teaching, I'm more interested in the skills that literature can teach students as a means for them to be job ready as qualified candidates with specific transferable skills. So I want to emphasize that the humanities should not be reduced to these things, to power skills and job readiness and their economic value, even though I spent a lot of time discussing this. Right? So it's the combination of knowing their economic power as well as appreciating their abstract value that I didn't really discuss at all, that work together to create curious minds, empathy, innovation, change, and good citizenship, and qualified candidates for the workforce. So moving on for tips for success. So the first tip for success is, being prepared for a reading and writing intensive course. So there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of writing. So I've taught for a long time. My longest teaching period was at a public university that had writing intensive labels for courses that were writing intensive. If Embry-Riddle had this label, Humanities 142 would fall under that. So as much reading as you're doing as much writing. So you need to be prepared for both. And then I talk about in that second bullet point, now the tips are going to be very wordy, but again, you have this video so you can pause it and that type of thing. So, and sometimes I think what can make this course feel rigorous, even as a 100-level course, is that the writing is all academic. As I stress again and again, the writing is all the same. It's all academic. It's all literary analysis, right? And so I'm just re-emphasizing that here. And then the last bullet point I talk about is I say that the course can also feel highly rigorous because literature in particular asks for its students to engage in one of the highest orders of critical thinking, which is invention and creation. So in Bloom's taxonomy, and it's the next slide in the blue image, is the foundation for teachers from all levels in terms of how to assess and create assignments for students. So, and this is Bloom's taxonomy here. So you can see here at the top of the peak, create is the most difficult cognitive task. And that's what literature asks you to do. That's really what argumentative writing asks you to do. It's generally what argumentative research writing asks you to do. Usually. And that means to have an argument that is your own. Not to repeat somebody else's argument that they've already made. In literature, we call that having having a new reading of a text, offer a new reading of a text, interpreting a text in a new way. That's creation, that's invention. And there are ways to do this. There's a really great book written on it that we don't use in this course, unfortunately. But that's part of argumentation, is the creation aspect. So in literature, what we are asked to do above all else, right, is to offer new readings of text. That is to read a text and make an argument about a text in a way that no one else has done before. Sounds difficult because it is difficult. I don't always expect that. I usually at least just expect an argument. Like, if at least you're doing that, if at least you've gotten to that point, that's great. Because, again, it's a 100-level course. Or take a reading of a text that has been done and extend on it. Or disagree with it and offer an alternative reading, right? That's also what you can do. So, as Humanities 142 students, you'll not be asked to engage in that advanced level of literary work, and that's why I'm saying that kind of offering new readings of works, right? That's advanced level literary analysis. But I'm just telling you this to give you an idea of the relationship between writing and literature, like that level of literary analysis, like what is actually happening. Literary analysts only read in order to make arguments. Like, that's the only reason we're reading. So from Bloom's taxonomy, you can see that understanding is a low cognitive skill, right? It's that the second from the bottom. Which is why writing in Humanities 142 that just demonstrates understanding is insufficient. You have to be doing analyzing. It's pretty much applying and up. Understanding is, like, you should be doing that in general. That's just reading comprehension. And reading comprehension at the college level in a 100 level class is a given. Like, you're just expected to do that. So it's really like applying and up, but it's mostly analyzing up. And I'll go over the student learning outcomes differently, which kind of focus on Bloom's taxonomy. The second tip for success, and I've gotten this question from students before throughout my career, is there a right or wrong way to make an argument about literature? And the answer is yes and no. The answer to a lot of questions I get is yes and no. So firstly, writing about literature allows us to engage in what we call interpretive autonomy, meaning you have the authority to interpret how you want to interpret. That's why we will there could be 10 of us in a room and we'll all have different interpretations of the text. So, right, we have privileged license for interpretive power. However, the power does come with limitations, per usual. So the limitations of interpretive autonomy are based on the text. So everything you argue about a text has to point back to the text explicitly, ideally, meaning you can point to the text and say, here is where it supports my argument, or implicitly, meaning that you can make a strong case for something that's like implicitly in the text and extrapolate it in some way so that it supports your argument. Right, and here I'm just restating what I just said, pointing to the text and provide the evidence. Just to extend what I was already talking about, I just give an example here from Star Wars of like, here's an example of like how an argument would not work. And when we talk about text, we call movies texts. Literature people call everything a text, not just books, because we're weird. But and I just use the example of like, if I were writing about Star Wars, say I wanted to make the argument that Luke Skywalker has a savior complex similar to Batman, and I think Luke Skywalker has it because he may have suffered a traumatic childhood similar to Bruce Wayne. Right? I can't make that argument. I just can't. There's nothing in Star Wars that supports my argument, if you're familiar with Star Wars. Everything is based on my feelings, and nothing is based on the actual text. And then I say we refer to films as text. There's zero indication that Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru abused Luke in any way, whereas we know that Bruce Wayne witnessed the murder of his parents. Luke also displays sadness when he realizes that his aunt and uncle have died, and for all we know, they gave him the best life they could. Right? So I could make an argument about Luke Skywalker having a savior complex, but I would have to really switch up my argument to point to something else. Because there's no evidence in that film, in any of the films, that would suggest that he suffered a traumatic childhood, unless I went to like episode 1, like the new one, and looked at young Anakin Skywalker. But not even that. Now I'm confusing myself. See, I'm thinking about it too much. But yeah, this is just to say, like, here's an example of like a bad argument where you can't point to a text and say, sorry, there's nothing in the text that supports the argument. Bruce Wayne, yeah, we got a lot of examples of that from the text, from the actual text, like the original, and then in like a million other versions of it. So, yeah. Third tip for success, be prepared to write formally and academically. This should sound like a reiteration because I've said it lots of times already. Addressing tone and style, right? Don't write in don't write in first or second person, writing in third person, keeping your tone and style formal and academic. You should have taken English 123 or composition at another university or college. That's pretty much it for this particular tip for success. Fourth tip for success, understand how to write an argumentative body paragraph. I dive deep into this one on my 3-step model videos, my two-parter video on the 3-step model. I dive very deep, but I don't dive too deep. I could dive deeper. I know they're long, but that's how you do it. And this is a strong tip for success. is understanding how to write an argumentative body paragraph. And this, again, I will emphasize this 3-step model. You're doing it again and again and again and again. So you need to know how to do it. And then I also focus on the emphasis on analysis. Analysis should constitute the majority of argumentative body paragraphs. If you're relegating 1 or 2 sentences to analysis at the end, you're doing it wrong. Peppering in short quotations is always an ideal thing to do. That way you're doing evidence, evidence analysis, evidence, evidence analysis, evidence, evidence analysis, and then you have a nice chunk of holistic analysis at the end, offering some framing to circle back to your claim/argument first sentence at the beginning of that body paragraph to connect all the dots, tie it up in a nice bow for your reader, reminding them why this argument is important and how it's working to make a nice little bulletproof argument, and then that's it. 5th tip for success, understanding how to integrate evidence. This one is tough. Just like the body paragraphs and the evidence integration is tough too. This one is really similar to the body paragraph one, although the body paragraph one is, I'd say you can learn it a little bit faster. Evidence integration, I think learning how to work with other sources and learning how to integrate them with your own writing, and that essentially means meshing your voice with other voices, how to do that smoothly and how to do it in a way that makes sense and supporting arguments is something that you work on throughout the years. It's not something you should expect to master by the end of this course, but it's something you should work on experimenting with, because it's something you learn through messing around with. Like, I'm going to try it this way. What about this? How's this working out for me? It's really helpful to read academic articles and see how they're integrating quotations. This is one of the best ways to learn. Hands down, it's one of the best ways I've learned. It's also one of the best ways to improve your vocabulary and what we call lexical density is to read, and to read slightly above your reading level. And you're going to have to do secondary source research anyways for your essays. So reading academic articles is a really valuable thing to do, even if you just read, when you're reading for your art, your essays, you should be reading the majority, if not all. There's a way to special read academic articles when you know how to read articles, but that takes many, many years of practice. But learning how to, reading through that type of level of reading and seeing the type of wording they're using, seeing how they're writing, seeing how they're integrating quotations, that's a really good way to learn. That's actually a practice called imitatio, which goes back to the classical era, which is just imitation. So imitation is a very old writing practice, is to learn through imitation. You see what other people are doing and you integrate it into your own work, and then you make it your own. So that's how we learn. It's one of the things we do. I mean, yeah, it's not unusual. But understanding how to integrate evidence is really important. Again, this is something I talk about in the 3-step model. When I talk about evidence, there's a lot of things that go on there. I talk about MLA a little bit. MLA has to do with evidence integration, but there's a lot of other aspects to evidence integration. I talk about the choosing between short and long quotations, not ending or starting paragraphs with evidence. Very important, because we always need to contextualize evidence, and then we always need to analyze evidence. So that's why we don't start or finish paragraphs with evidence. So a lot of stuff going on with evidence integration that can happen. I just want you to know that I don't expect perfect, but I want to see people trying. And I recognize that this is something that it takes time to get better at. Not better at, but it takes time to like learn to get in the vibe of like, and what your style of evidence integration is, because everyone does it a little bit differently. And it's not something I anticipate students to master after English 123 and Humanities 142. I perfectly can integrate evidence now. No, you can't. I've been writing for 25 years and I still can't perfectly. I mean, I could do it quickly if I have a quick deadline, but it's not going to be perfect. So, I could spend tons of time revising it. The revision hole is real. So just very quickly, just be aware of the student learning outcomes. These are what we, the university, and I as your teacher, hope that you will learn from the class. I'm not going to read through them. They are in your syllabus. But I do talk about what do they mean, the student learning outcomes. We call them SLOs. And again, I emphasize it's one type of writing. I say where they happen. Those are all your types of writing right there. And I explain here what literary analysis is. It is just like standard research paper writing, where you make an argument about something, except you are using what we refer to as a primary source, an original text or artifact as your evidence, rather than bringing in secondary sources. So, for example, in the essays, you're using primary and secondary research. In your discussion posts, you are using strictly primary sources, which are the texts themselves, the literature, the short stories and the poetry and the plays, right? Those are the primary sources. And then I say one thing I've learned over the years is that students who are not in literature or didn't take literature courses in high school, particularly AP Lit, or haven't taken a literature course in many years, are sometimes quite confused about or scared of writing about literature. And I said, for me, it always came naturally. But teaching literature is just as difficult, because it always came so naturally. It comes so naturally to me. When I first started teaching literature, I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, oh my God, how do I teach literature? It just was so innate to me to just be like, yeah, here's this text. I get it. I'm analyzing it. What do you want from me? So when I started teaching literature, like 16, 17 years ago, I was like, what? How do I teach people this thing that I just know how to do? And so I've been doing my best to verbalize that process. And I think it's because I'm also so steeped in writing as well, which is my other subject matter expert area. I think it makes the most sense to me to do it through writing. And that's why I focus so much on that. Also because you are doing a lot of writing. But I try to do my best. I really do. But I also, so but know that it's very difficult to teach literature. And it's very difficult to teach literary analysis, because for those of us who do literary analysis, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, I get it. I love doing it. I know how to do it, and I get it, and I love it. And when you're asked to teach it, you're like, okay, like, yeah, what? Okay, so it's taken, and I still don't feel like I've mastered teaching students literary analysis. I don't know. So, and then I talk about, okay, well, what does explain mean in the student learning outcome in the SLO? And that just means writing analytically, thoughtfully, argumentatively about literature in these ways, right? Demonstrate that you've read the literature, you've understood it, right? I already talked about, these are givens, right? You understand, you have reading comprehension. Don't give summaries of the literature unless it's on an as-needed basis. Go beyond just reading and comprehension. After identifying certain literary elements, you're able to explain how they're working to serve the entire text. That is, you need to be able to ask and answer questions like, what is the purpose of this text? What is it trying to say about something? Is it doing a good job about commenting on that something? Then, once you have an answer, you argue through analysis and evaluation. Remember, those are part of the Bloom's taxonomy. How the author is using that literary element, such as subject, theme, author, or voice, to help them with whatever bigger purpose you think the text has. That's almost like feedback. Like, I would give that is like basically feedback I would give on a paper. Like, you haven't made an argument. This is the type of thing you need to do to make an argument in a paper. So, but that's one of that's getting into that higher level Bloom's taxonomy, and that's why I've labeled it as a more difficult expectation. Because that's saying, for example, if you're talking about symbol, right? It's not just about pointing and saying, that's a symbol. It's like, that's great. Yes, that is a symbol. Who cares? Why is it important? What does it mean? Why does the text have it there? Why did the author put it there? Right? That's what we want to know. We want to stay away from pointing, right? That's not literary analysis. That's just saying, I found a symbol, or I found a theme. Yes, that's a theme. Okay, good. You're off to a start. Now tell us why it's significant. What does that tell us about? Is the text using that theme as commentary for some cultural reason? What is that text doing with that theme? Is it trying to make, does it mean something? Why is it important? So we always want to know why. We don't just want to know what. First we want to know what, and then we want to know why. So very important, very important. Always important. I'll always be asking those questions. So anyways, long presentation, I know, but it has a lot of information in it. I hope it sheds some light on some stuff in terms of what the humanities are, what literature is, and the humanities are supposed to be doing in terms of teaching you skills and the type of skills, the soft skills and the transferable skills in terms of job readiness and the workforce, that we do have our eyes on those things, that I am not here not just to teach you literature. I am here to teach you skills. And I use the vehicle of literature and writing as a means to teach you skills. I could go much deeper into like, this is exactly how literary analysis teaches you these specific types of soft skills. I could go way deeper into addressing exactly how that works if you really want to know how the bacon's made. But I don't think you want I don't think any of us want this presentation to be any longer. So, but just know that there's a lot of there's much more to be said about those things, but I'm trying to keep it as not long as possible. So, anyways, that's all I have for now. For now, hopefully this was helpful, and thank you so much.